time I was growing up, I used to hear preachers. Well, I didn't hear anything the preacher said while I was growing up. Now it's on. The whole time I was growing up, I'm just kidding. Y'all all heard that, right? It's funny that happened and Mike wasn't on. You couldn't hear what the preacher was saying. I've always heard preachers say things like, let's get our Christian life and what we do here on Sunday out into the world. Take it with you. Let your Sunday look like your Monday, or your Monday look like your Sunday. Let your Thursdays look like your, Sunday. And let's continue what we do here in this place, out there in that place. And I don't know what they mean. I don't know if they know what they mean. Because we want that to happen. We understand the urge for, I want this, what I feel here. Worshiping God and interaction, a connection with God in this place. What I feel in this place, I want to happen out there. When we talk about patience or love or forgiveness in this place, I want to be patient and loving and forgiving out there. What Jesus was for me, I want to be out there. But you get out there and it just doesn't work. It just doesn't work. How many of you, don't raise your hand just in case you might be the only one. How many of you have felt that frustration in which you desperately want the things that God has offered us and that the lifestyle that we talk about in this place, you want that out there. And it doesn't always mesh. The reason, because when we say we want to surrender all, we're not quite sure what all is. Our lives are so compartmentalized, or for the teenagers, divided. But I saw somebody go, good. Yeah. Our lives are so divided that we have different elements of our life. And we're good at some areas, and we're bad at other areas, right? So some of you are very intellectually proficient. You're very smart. The rest of us don't like you very much. Now, those who are intellectually proficient often are socially backward. One of the smartest men I've ever known is one of the most socially awkward men I've ever met. And so we have, you're not here, trust me. Sorry. Neither extreme exists in this place. His name was John Fortner. He's a professor at Harding University. Well, not anymore, he just retired. One of like the 13 people in the world who could read cuneiform. But he's really hard to talk to at times. Because he's not sure which language you're speaking. He speaks like 13 of them. But some of us who are intellectually proficient, we're not that socially proficient, or emotionally, we're not very emotionally mature, or we're not physically, we're not doing the sorts of things physically that are good for our bodies. See, there's a lot of elements in your life, and a lot of times when we say, what I want to take what we find in here out there, what we mean is, couldn't just the rest of the world be a spiritual endeavor? But it just doesn't work that way. Does that track? That's why that works. Well, that's why sometimes you feel it here. I want what's in here. I want it out there. And it just doesn't work. This is a spiritual endeavor. And there's things, there's going to be things, like most of you aren't doing anything physical right now. You're just sitting. And we're not having to socially interact right now. We're just sitting. Most of what you see is the back of other people's heads and this very good-looking face. I was going to be self-detrimental right there, but that just, y'all wouldn't have thought it. That's awesome. So there's I don't really believe that my face is very good looking. Moderately good looking. That's all I'm going to say. Yeah, it's close to Halloween, as it works. For Halloween, very good looking face. So you don't interact socially, you don't interact, and a lot of times you can just switch off intellectually, you can just worship, and sometimes that's a great place to be. And sometimes you can feel it emotionally, and sometimes you don't. But we are five-sided. There's all sorts of elements of our lives going on, and whenever we neglect those elements, that's why there's some guys who are really good Christians, and you say they're really good Christians. And why? And you say, why are they really good Christians? It's because they can teach Bible class. Well, why is it that they can teach Bible class, do a really good job, and then lose their mind at football games? It's because they intellectually, and maybe even on a certain level spiritually, they have some things figured out and they are mature in those areas, but emotionally they have yet to mature. What we're hoping is that Jesus doesn't just apply to your spiritual life. Harding University is where I went to school for the last part of my schooling. I started out at Arkansas Tech, and actually before that I started out at DeQueen High School. And at DeQueen High School, you are and some of you just learned that I'm a leper. I'm sorry if that offends. At DeQueen High School, what makes you popular is whether or not you're physically mature. Are you tall? Can you play sports? This and that. You know, those of us who were intellectually proficient for DeQueen High School standards, we thought what made you popular was that you were smart. And that really didn't play. But if you can play basketball or football, or even now the way it is at all the other, a lot more sports they have in high schools now than when I was going to high school. But if you could play a sport, you were a popular kid. Didn't matter how, like talking to you was like talking to a bag of bricks. Didn't matter if you were socially inept or intellectually mature, emotionally mature. If you were physically mature, you were popular. Went to Arkansas Tech. If you were socially mature, you were popular. This does not bode well for old Benjamin. Not a great one-on-one communicator. But there is I lost some sense of accomplishment going to Arkansas Tech. Now, when I transferred to Arkansas Tech, because Arkansas Tech's Bible program is lacking, really. It doesn't have a Bible program. Still not funny. All right, so when I transferred from Arkansas Tech to Harding University, it was popular to be spiritually mature. And people would go around, people who sounded like this on a regular basis when they were out playing basketball or in the library, or, well, they wouldn't shout it like this in the library, but just in the dorm, they'd say, "Hey man, how you doing? How's things going? How's your spiritual life? Did your voice just get weird? Because it sounded like your voice just got weird." But the thing that was real popular at Harding is if you could be spiritually mature, how's your prayer life? You know that your prayer life can be disrupted by your indigestion. Be disrupted by headache. It could be disrupted by the fact that you and your spouse are not getting along at the moment. All of the elements of your life fit together. And it's in that fitting together that we find the holistic approach to a relationship or a surrender to God. If we do not fuse those into one, we will always have a sense that we are lacking something. Some of us are not very emotionally mature. Fly off the handle, we lose our tempers, we don't know how to grieve. Some of us are not very socially mature. We don't like being around people. People bother us. Some of us haven't read a whole lot, and that's no judgment on you. It's just, that's the case. And a lot of times, whenever we feel this distance between what we have here and what we lack out there, it's because we aren't letting Jesus into our physical, emotional, social lives. It's because we're not letting Him into the different elements of us. You see, it's not about whether Jesus is here and out there. It's about whether He has all of you. See, if He had all of you, if you had your social interactions, whenever you interacted with other people, like say at Walmart or at the gas station, when you interact, if that was governed by Jesus, how would your life look different? If your physicality was governed by Jesus, how would your life look different? If your emotions were governed by Jesus and you wanted to follow, if His reign laid down on your emotions, how would that change your life? I'm guessing you wouldn't lose your mind at football games. I'm guessing. See, it's not that Jesus hasn't covered the whole geography of our lives. It's that we haven't surrendered all of our very diversified life to Jesus Himself. That's why we feel the disconnect. I think I've explained that like 3 times now because I wanted you to get it. So when we say I surrender, what we mean when we say I surrender all is not just I surrender my Sunday mornings, or I surrender my spiritual life. It means that I believe that God created me, and He created me as this multifaceted person. And I'm strong in some elements and I'm weak in some elements, but all of those elements I'm giving to God. All of those elements I'm giving my emotions, I'm giving my social interactions, I'm giving it all to God. And so when we come in here and we do this spiritual thing, God's here and present in this spiritual thing. And when you go out there and you do that occupational thing, or you do that social thing, or you run into this emotional thing, God can be present in that place too. The danger of dividing it is believing that somehow it's God's fault that He's not there, that He's not present. But when we surrender all, what we're saying is Jesus is the most important thing, and His sacrifice and His resurrection give me all sorts of freedom to be who He created me to be in the best version of that possible, which is who He created me as, and a follower of Jesus. God has given us, or Jesus has surrendered Himself to us so that we will surrender ourselves to Him. He became like man and humbled Himself to death, and not just death, but death on the cross. The rest of that passage in Philippians 2 says, and at His name, because He did these things, God will lift Him up, and at the name of Jesus every knee shall bow. Every knee shall bow at His name. Because He surrendered, we will surrender. And we won't just surrender our Sunday mornings. Listen, going to church is good for you. It's good for you. It's great and here's why. It's not just good because it's good to sit in pews or for the advanced among us chairs. We still have people sitting in pews. You should all in the back row, but don't look. But it's not just coming and sitting and singing and doing the regular things. It's not The reason church is good is because church is community. It's a group of people who are all struggling, like all get out, to do everything they can to follow Jesus. And we're all failing, and we all don't know some things. We're just all in this together, but we're in it together. That's what good church is. Not people who've got it all right, not people who've got it all together. It's just people who are together. We get it. So when we surrender all, it's not just about this moment, although this moment helps you. It's about everything. About everything you've got going on. We got two guys. I don't know if you knew this. We got two guys getting baptized this morning. Two guys. Two young men. Ty and Braden are... don't look. They are getting baptized. And what that means is that they are surrendering all of themselves to Jesus. It's not just something you do when it's sort of the thing you do when you want to be a teenager in a Church of Christ, which is what I felt like when I was growing up at times. But it's them saying, I believe that Jesus is King, and I believe that He should rule everything about me, so here we go. One of the most important things about baptism is that there's people watching you do it. It is a commitment. It is you publicly saying, I surrender. I am giving up. I am giving it over. So just about every wedding, the groomsman, or the best man, leans over to the groom right before the bride opens the doors. Bride never opens the doors on her own. Someone opens the doors for the bride. Which is not fair. They just sort of scooted the groom in. So no one, you stand there and be quiet. Scoot me in. The bride gets doves and flower petals and 4 women in uglier dresses walking before her to make the dress better. Then the groom leans over, the best man leans over to the groomsman, or the groom, and says, last chance, man. It's sort of a tradition, I don't know. Last chance. Now, when the doors open, that's that moment when the groom looks back at the best man and said, you must be out of your mind. Because that woman is coming down that aisle to marry this ugly man. And why in the world would I abandon what she offered because you're afraid of commitment? Now, when we get baptized, what we're saying is the groom, actually, he makes himself out to be the groom, which, because in Hebrew times, the groom was the one that came and got the bride. But why would I say, I'm scared of the commitment because it's going to change my life? Of course it's going to change your life. Before, wasn't married to a beautiful woman. Now, married to a beautiful, wonderful woman. Definitely changed my life. Jesus' connection with us, when we surrender to Him, when we're baptized, as Paul says, into His death, burial, and resurrection, when we are raised, we walk in the newness of life. It's our commitment to God and to the church, public, saying, I surrender all. Because He is worthy of surrendering all to. Everything you've got, He's worthy of it. This is what Paul said in our text this morning. Galatians chapter 1. This is what he said. This is Paul talking about Jesus. Jesus He is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn of all creation. Now, I'm going to just say this real quick. This is going to get confusing. Paul, sometimes when he wanted to sound eloquent, got a little confusing. So we're going to have to say these things a little clearer. I thought about just translating this myself, but it's even worse in the Greek. So here we go. We'll stick with the English. For by Jesus, all these things were created, in heaven and on earth, visible, invisible, whether thrones or dominions or rulers or authorities, all things were created through Him and for Him. Now sometimes people want to take that passage and say, okay, what's this? What's the thrones? What are the dominions? Let's define dominions. Let's define rulers. Let's define... Paul's just getting at everything. That's a very good literary way or rhetorical way to say everything you can think of, every powerful thing you can think of, everything is submitting to Jesus. It is under His authority. All things were created through Him. Everything was created through Him and for Him. He is before all things, and in Him all things hold together, and He is the head of the body, the church. He is the beginning of the firstborn from among the dead, so that in everything He might have the supremacy. In everything you've got going on, Paul argues, Jesus should be the supreme factor. Because everything that was made and that has been made and that is held together and everything that is good and everything that is powerful, Jesus is bigger and more supreme than those things. So in your life, you've got to let Him rule. There's no way to just somehow take that warm and fuzzy spiritual feeling you feel in this place and take it out into the world if you're not letting Jesus rule all of you. If you're not letting Him... I always like those bumper stickers that say, God is my co-pilot, and there was a bumper sticker that was like, God, your co-pilot, you better switch seats, and it said sing at the bottom, and then there was like God is your air traffic controller. It was just, let's just all agree that analogies break down at some point when talking about God. All of them. God is so supreme, there's nothing to compare Him to. What Jesus did is so fantastic, there's nothing to compare it to. That's why Paul, throughout Scripture, when talking about how our sins were forgiven, said it about 6 or 7 different ways. He said we were redeemed, we were set free out of captivity, we were adopted, we were proven not guilty, or the judge set us free. There's so many different ways that he says your sins are gone and that Jesus is alive and He's King and that God has made Jesus supreme. You just can't explain it with one analogy. The best thing this world has got to understanding God is watching someone who professes Jesus Christ as King living in a way that they have let Jesus affect every part of their life. The best thing we've got going for us in talking about how great Jesus is surrendering all of ourselves to Jesus and then living that out in the open. So we got 2 guys who are going to surrender all today. Unless you want to back out. Jesus would always say that. Jesus would always say, people would say, I want to follow you. And you'd say, hey, I don't have anywhere to sleep. You want to think about it. Because it's a big step. You are surrendering everything you've got. It's the best thing you could ever do. And it's the hardest thing you could ever do. But it's worth it. It's just worth it 1,000 times over. Paul says about Jesus, He is the supreme one. He is the one above everything else. He goes on. For God was pleased. God really liked it that His Son had all His fullness dwell in Him. For God was pleased to have all His fullness dwell in Him, and through Him to reconcile to Himself all things, whether things on earth. This is another rhetorical thing. He's just saying everything, whether things on earth or things in heaven, by making peace through His blood shed on the cross. See, when Braden and when Ty come and get baptized, I want you to know something. It's a scary thing, one, to do this in front of a large group of people, but two, what's happening with them in there has nothing to do with the fact that they're working at it. Jesus paid the price. Jesus gave the gift, and now they're accepting it. They're claiming it. They're claiming the free gift of grace that Jesus has. They're claiming it. And they're saying, I want to be, they're looking at the bride of Christ, they're looking at Jesus the King, and they're saying, I want to be with Him. I want to be on His team, His side, with Him, in Him. All the things that Romans 6 talks about. I want to be that. And so, like I said, we can talk about surrendering all over and over again, but we're not going to actually feel it until we watch somebody surrender it all. Today we've got some guys taking the first step, but tomorrow you're going to have to take the second and the third step. You're going to have to take steps that maybe the 5,000th step. You are making day by day your life a testimony of the fact that you've surrendered everything you have to Jesus. The question is, how's that lining up for you? Is that working? Does it feel like you've surrendered everything to Jesus? Or when you leave here, you feel like it's somehow, you sort of left Jesus here? Maybe you're only giving your spiritual life to Jesus, and not your emotional, not your social, or physical. Maybe you're only giving parts of yourself. If you want Him out there, if when you walk out of these doors and on your Mondays and your Tuesdays, you want God to be present like He is on your Sundays, then the problem is you got to give it. You got to give all things to Him, and realize that He can live in you in more than just a spiritual fashion. He can be in your marriage, and how you treat your spouse. He can be in your workplace and how you work or how you treat your workers. You just got to let Him be in those places. You just got to surrender all. If you want to take the first step this morning, along with Braden and along with Ty, and the baptistry is open. We would love to commit you to Jesus. But if you need help taking the 3,000th step, if it's been this long journey for you and it just has not been what you'd hoped, feel like you're just in that rut, the same old rut you were when you started giving your life to Jesus. We want to help with that too. We think we can. But if you need anything this morning, please come forward while we stand.